Top of the evening, everyone, and welcome to Truth Noir. I'm joined here by my friend and compatriot, fellow concerned citizen, and part owner of Dronebox Labs here that makes this show possible, Mr. Nolan Silverstein.
Hey, everybody.
And so, let's see. Yeah, that's him close up. And back to me. So what we figured we would do for the Christmas season here, which we are celebrating quite thoroughly, is to celebrate one of the greatest gifts that we have been given, and that is, of course, the freedom of speech. And I'm joined here by Nolan because he had a pretty cool book on the topic, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. And that book is
Freedom of Speech.
Freedom of Speech in the United States. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we are at. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. But first, a little bit of history. Because, I mean, what would this show be without boring notes? So, as it turns out, the first usage of the word freedom we find in human writing occurring in the 24th century BC, attributed to King Urukagina. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
You're free to do so.
Of Lagash, in the at the time newly conquered kingdom of Babylon, and it was spoken of in the context of the new abilities that these people had, or their no longer getting taxed or tortured for
chained to
certain
a pole
things,
anymore.
Enslavement, freedom from these things. But it's not until the 8th century BC in Greece where we get the concept of actual freedom of speech and expression, and various other freedoms as well. Yeah, man, it was a concept that I wanted to talk about. Nolan's pretty knowledgeable about the subject, and he has to be, because he, helps produce shows created by a bunch of yahoos that, sometimes spout nonsense. And so, thanks for coming on the show and helping us clear some things up, man.
Thanks. Although I'm not an expert in this stuff, I've taken some classes.
That's all right.
I'll caveat that.
That's close enough for me. I mean.
This is all part of my training.
I like how we're going to
protecting myself.
I like how we're going to put at the end of this episode, we do not specifically endorse the views of one of the co-owners of this company.
I don't think I guess I technically own some of the company. So.
You act like you do.
That's because I'm the mouthpiece.
But yeah, man. So what are some of the basics of the freedom of speech in America as you've come to know them from this book?
The thing that always interested me was freedom of speech broken into two categories: freedom of speech from the government and freedom of speech from civil liability, like what other people can stop you from saying.
Okay.
So when it comes to the government, you have the right to express it's life, liberty, and property, right?
Pursuit of happiness.
Like, you have the right to do whatever you want as long as it doesn't impinge on someone else's civil rights. So freedom of speech is the government can't stop you from expressing ideas as long as they're not going to cause the immediate death of someone else, or overtake the government.
Right. The concept of you can't walk into a movie theater and yell fire, that is not within your freedom of expression, because it could create panic and harm.
And that the government can tell you, you can't do that.
Right.
As a society, we're like, no, you can't do that. But then civilly, there are things that you can't do that don't have to do with the government. Like, I can't read this book out loud on this show because somebody else owns this book, and I would impinge on their ability to make a living.
Right. Yeah, so you get into like commercial copyright,
Right.
things of that nature, and also these concepts, some of which I want to discuss as the show progresses, of slander and libel and things of that nature. So
Yeah, those are important, I think, to have as a general rule, because you don't want somebody to this. We live in a community.
well, yeah, and it comes down to, I think, yeah, you can express yourself freely, but when your expression takes away from or diminishes someone else's reputation, that could hurt them financially and within the community in which we live.
Can hurt somebody's feelings.
Yeah, and as we all know, everyone is a precious little star these days, and you can't hurt anyone's tiny little feelings anymore.
Sure.
And I kind of feel like this is where people forget about the freedom of speech and expression, and the kind of concept of like, all right, well, you get to say things, and I also get to ignore you.
Yeah.
Because if I were saying stupid things, you would get to ignore me, and we would both still have our right to express ourselves. But I feel like today, and there was a good quote by my man Voltaire, that's not him, by Voltaire, that,
Yeah.
and I think this is a kind of founding principle of the freedom of speech, the concept that, even if I disapprove of what you say, I will defend to the death your right to say it. And, I feel like that's what, a lot of people have done in the name of protecting our freedom of speech, that gets stomped on a little bit by people being a little oversensitive.
I think it's something that I think societally we have a problem with, is that we forget that everything you can trace in American law or in societal order can be traced back to like one event for the most part. So for example, like American law has a lot to do with John Locke, and
Sure.
American legal philosophy comes down to those ideas of the death of one innocent person outweighs the wrongful death of one innocent person outweighs, what is it? It's like the rightful death of a million.
The
There's a
needs of
saying.
the many,
Don't outweigh the one.
right.
One
It's-
wrong is the worst.
Yeah, it's the opposite of Star Trek.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And that's American legal philosophy stems from that idea. Like all the things that they wrote from the beginning came from that guy's ideas that he wrote down.
Right. And it
so-
has a lot to do with our legal structure and
Right.
why you're, there at least supposed to be these checks that you're supposed to be tried by a jury of your peers. You're supposed to be able to face your accusers so that it narrows down greatly, hopefully, that possibility that an innocent person might go to prison.
Right, because all that stuff was happening there. Like, I think this guy killed someone. I'm going to just have a trial.
Right.
They had to have habeas corpus because they're like, you can't just try a guy without even hearing what he had to say about something. 'Cause they would convict someone and then have an order to kill them.
Right.
So you can't do that. And that was a matter of figuring that out over the course of time.
Right. Someone has to be informed of why they're being arrested and detained. Certain precedents like Miranda, the Miranda case and the Miranda rights, that you have to be told that certain things that you say can be used against you. And a lot of times, like, it's stuff like that that is kind of falling by the wayside these days, that I think it's important to bring back up.
To skip ahead, that's happening now, is they're having trials of American citizens without having them there.
Yeah.
There were those terrorists, and they by all means, dudes are combatants against the United States, but they are American citizens. They had trials of them and declared that they can kill them without having them there to defend themselves. That goes against what basic constitutional rights you have as an American citizen.
Yeah. So, what are some of the legal precedents that have to do with freedom of speech? I know there was one in particular that you wanted to talk
Yeah, the one
about.
I want to talk about, it's open to the page. I found the page. Where is it?
So this is a fairly old one, am I correct?
It's from 1969.
and deals with kind of a couple different topics in one.
It overrules several different ideas of, here, it's right here, of what is protected or not protected speech when it comes to harming another person.
Okay.
So there was originally the bad tendency precedent, which was like, it was like a British kind of thing, is nip it in the bud. Like as soon as somebody starts to say something that might cause violence, you just arrest them. Then there was a case that established clear and present danger, that you had to be in a situation that could become violently escalated. But then finally, Brandenburg versus Ohio is what I want to talk about, which is basically a KKK leader wanted to have a rally in a post-World War II Jewish community in Ohio. And the community didn't want him to do that. They tried to fine him. They tried to stop him through precedents, like of, just blocking him with what would be considered unconstitutional means. And the courts found that they can't do that because just being a hateful person doesn't mean you're going to kill anybody.
Right.
And even though they're bringing up these terrible feelings and these people that were persecuted by Hitler,
Right.
he still has the right to do that because we're in America. And it's a really, like, it's one of those things where it's super fucked up. Like, you shouldn't be able to be that cruel to people, but at the same time you have to defend the right to be that cruel to other people.
Right. Yeah, and it goes back to that kind of overlying principle of, I may despise what you have to say, but one of the founding principles is that we will defend your right to say it.
Right, because everything's subjective. All communication is subjective, and what's right today might not be right tomorrow.
Yeah, and it has to exist because you get into these concepts of, well, what if your religious beliefs offend my religious beliefs? And there's all kinds of reasons why that needs to exist.
Yeah.
And it helps everyone get along better.
It's important, I think.
Yeah, man, and it's important to, I think, be able to get past your own anger at what someone is saying, because I think that's a big problem today, is that a lot of people are like, well, that's just mean and you shouldn't say it, and we should ban everyone's ability to say that. And it's like, well, that's a slippery slope.
It is, because you can't make a law that stops people from being mean to each other.
Yeah, just because, if only it were that easy, but all that does is create resentment, and it creates a massive prison population, right? Because you're going to start throwing people in prison for just saying not nice things, and then nothing's going to get built. Nothing's going to get put in boxes because everyone's in prison because they said something mean to someone. And,
Well, they turn against each other. The people that are putting people in prison will turn against each other.
Yeah, that
doesn't
too.
Work. It just doesn't work. It's all subjective. You can't have an objective law about a subjective concept.
Right.
It doesn't work to judge the content unless there's specific situations which the government has, as a community, decided can be addressed. For example, speaking out against the draft is one that people have historically approved of legal sanctions for, because at the time the country is in peril, is the idea. If there's a draft, the idea would be that the country is in peril.
Right, and that you're engaged in an act of treason to protest.
You're trying to stop us from all living.
Right.
And whether we agree with the draft or not becomes inconsequential at that time, which is very tricky because it's a political situation.
Right.
But as a community of people who elect officials, they've decided that you can't stop people from taking part in the draft. That's a accountable offense. The government can stop you from doing that. Or Pentagon Papers. Things have been stolen from the government that could have led to someone creating a nuclear weapon. At the time, that was sanctioned, but then it was not sanctioned. We found that could be public record.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and it's some of the core values of freedom of speech, go back to sometimes an opposing argument might actually be the truth. Like, these are not 1 + 1 = 2 concepts that you can say, well, this is right and this is wrong. Sometimes the opposing view might be better for more people, especially when the prevailing decision that's been made is probably made by people in leadership positions or by the very wealthy. This is a way for people that are not as affluent to kind of even that playing field, is by having freedom of speech. And it's, another reason why it's very important.
I think the best thing to talk about in that situation is prior restraint. Do you know the term prior restraint?
Yeah, prior restraint is the concept of censoring someone's work before it's been published.
Right.
Or arresting someone, like your nip it in the bud law, that if someone is saying something that could cause a ruckus, you arrest them before they have a chance to speak further of it.
Right, and then the idea is if prior restraint reigns, you have to send everything to a censor before it becomes public knowledge.
Right.
Which, in an Orwellian system or something like that, we'd be in a lot of trouble if somebody gets to look at the secrets before we expose that they're a secret. And that's a big problem in American history, is what can be subject to prior restraint. Because if somebody does have a national secret that could cause the death of millions of people, how does the government know to stop that? And the answer is they can't. Like, with the system we have, they can't stop that from happening. What's happening in America now is they're trying to do that again.
Right.
But maybe the argument is that the costs are higher than they've ever been.
True. But yeah, there's also that, and and it's a double-edged sword, and it is a thin line that has to be walked, because there are privacy abuses going on now under the auspice of because we got to catch terrorists.
Right.
But they're also violating the privacy of many hundreds of millions of people who have not done anything wrong. And it goes back to that: if one innocent person is harmed by that, then the system has failed the citizenry as a whole. Because if that can happen to one person unjustly, it can pretty much happen to anyone.
Yeah, I believe we live in a system right now where they have figured out how to take those rights away from us, but no one's acting on it, especially. But the times could change very quickly. People could act on that if they stop ignoring it. And they shouldn't have the right to do that.
Yeah, and one of the ways that they do that is, and it's very effective, unfortunately, is they say, well, it's a time of war, and wartime is one of the kind of somewhat protected abilities or times when the government can censor people. Mm-hmm. And so then what do? You just say, well, we're at war all the time. There's a war on terrorism. There's a war on drugs. Oh, this place has been attacked over here, so we need to, in this country now, start censoring the things that people are saying. And as you've seen on the show before, I think a lot of these attacks are staged. Not that they're not actually happening, that the people aren't getting hurt, but I think they're allowed to happen. I think they're planned for the specific purpose of helping to facilitate taking people's rights away.
And here's a good example. I don't think the government can sue you for saying that. You just made an accusation, right? You claim that.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, this is a thing that I wanted to get into because Nolan mentioned a thing to me on a previous episode that we weren't quite sure about, and so I wanted to try and get this cleared up. And it's also for anyone watching that also has strong opinions and shares them on the message board or in public or in writing at all. So yes, please help us understand how to say these things that we might believe to be true, but I can't substantiate specifically.
You're doing something with this show that is a gray line. You have a show that presumably you want to be successful.
Right.
You want to make money with it.
Sure.
So you're engaging in commercial speech. Commercial speech is a defined set of terms that has to do with trying to represent a brand or a cause or a company to make money.
Okay.
Political speech is on the opposite spectrum. Political speech has to do with rights in your community, things that you're doing in the world around you and beliefs you have that are sort of separate from the way you make your living. You're in a weird intersection of those two things. Because if you are to talk about, say, a bank, and you were to say that they funded a terrorist organization, since you are not purely speaking as a person that is concerned, you're also speaking as the head of a company, you're in much greater liability.
Okay.
They could come after you much more easily. So you can't make those kinds of claims. You have a far lower amount of headroom to make that kind of claim.
Okay.
Than if you were me, Norm, nonprofit, I want to change the world and expose corruption. If you're a whistleblower. So you're in this weird place where you have to always be aware of what you're saying and how it could be perceived, and make sure you don't directly insult or slander another company. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It is a weird, I've always been really interested in commercial speech, because commercial speech is the least protected part of our speech. Artistic speech is protected pretty well. Political speech is protected pretty well. There's a whole multifold test, but commercial speech isn't that well protected because you're trying to make money. You're using ideas to try and get ahead in a market. So when you do that, you lose a lot of ground to be able to say whatever you want to be able to say.
Okay. So how do I make that statement?
You have to attribute it to a source. That's always helpful. So if you have a source that told you blah, blah, blah bank killed blah, blah, blah person,
okay,
attributing it directly to that source and providing that source pretty much indemnifies you from doing that.
Okay.
Again, I'm not a lawyer, but that's pretty much how it works. Is I'm presenting you someone
because
else's
it's
belief.
not me saying it as my opinion in a public forum. I am
Right.
quoting from
And I believe ethically you should do that anyway, because you didn't do the research. You, Norm, didn't see someone get killed. You, Norm, didn't know someone who knew that guy that got killed.
Right.
You, Norm, have zero physical evidence that exists in Norm's world. You're taking evidence from someone else, and you might as well present that they gave you that evidence. I think that's an ethical thing in general conversation. If you heard a rumor about somebody, it's usually good to say where the rumor came from, right?
Right.
So I think that's a good way to do it, is to provide a bibliography with your show. The Vince show, we had him doing that, was providing an addendum document to his show that said where his stuff came from, so that A, an interested person can look it up, and B, you're sort of allowing people to put their own pieces together instead of just me, Norm, this is my opinion. Because it is a liability to take someone else's opinion and make it your own.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is a fair statement.
You just have to work it into your dialogue, I think. The hard part is working it into dialogue. Because when I'm talking to you, I don't want to be like, this source at this webpage
Right. Yeah.
did this thing. But you have all this stuff around you. You could even, if you have it with the slideshow, you could pretty much just provide that source at the exact same time you do it and just say it is reported that, right? This is back to the freedom of speech stuff. If you write on Twitter, kill cops, you're protected, but somebody might do something. Somebody might arrest you for that because they're an idiot, and you have to deal with idiots in life. That's a little back to what we were talking about before.
Right. Yeah. And that's, good to clarify that in what forums, and you're never going to hear me say kill cops. I will say that, I believe that many of them are, of a certain low position in life. In talking in generalities,
Yeah.
or even about a specific person, not a corporation, dealing with, I guess you would call it now, slander and libel. What are some guidelines for people that produce content as far as that goes?
Our legal department yells at me all the time for like the Bill Cosby thing. I was making a lot of Bill Cosby jokes, and he's fair game now, right? Bill Cosby raped those people. I'll look at the camera and be like, dude's a rapist. Everybody says that now, so it's sort of become this thing. But I'm leaving myself pretty open by saying that because he hasn't been tried and convicted.
Formally convicted, right?
So I have to say, Bill Cosby allegedly raped a bunch of people and is probably a pretty fucked up human being, right? And you have to do that in all situations, really, until someone's been found guilty. Otherwise, you're leaving yourself open to some sort of lawsuit.
Right. What are the rules if you want to just talk shit about someone?
Is it funny?
Yes.
It's supposed to be funny? Well, there's
well, I mean, okay, funny or like just scathing, like you don't like someone that has been on the news doing something messed up.
Well, there's like when Jerry Falwell sued Larry Flynn. Are you familiar with that case?
Sure.
He said he liked to fuck his mom.
Well, I'm not familiar with specifics, but I'm familiar with that the case occurred.
Larry Flynn published a article, it's probably in here somewhere, published an article in Hustler magazine. There was a testimonial from Larry Flynn about how he liked to fuck his mom in an outhouse. And Falwell sued him for defamation of character. And it was ruled that that was an obvious joke. Anyone could tell that that's a joke because Falwell is someone of such high esteem in his community, he would never do that.
Right.
So he's protected. So if you're saying, like, Obama fucks, I don't know,
goats.
Likes to fuck goats, you're fine. You can say that.
Right.
Because Obama obviously doesn't fuck goats.
Yeah, he's a married man.
And you're not doing any damage to him, really, because you're Norm and he's Obama.
Right.
That's another part of it, is what your potential to actually hurt them is. But let's say it's my neighbor. Let's say it's the pot dispensary next door. I can't accuse them of shit that, even though I know that they do it, I can't accuse them of it, right? I can imply something, but I can't say what I believe that they're doing that's a crime, because they could sue me. Now, would they sue me? No, because they sell drugs. But what's like an example of someone you'd want to talk shit about?
Oh, certain specific, officers of the law, potentially.
Like their
Maybe
name?
someone, someone on the news, like that piece of shit that beat up the homeless woman on the side of the freeway.
I don't think you're going to have trouble for calling somebody a piece of shit. You can call people names. That is protected speech.
Okay.
You can call anybody any sort of name. As hurtful of a name as you want to call them, you can call them that.
I'll have to work on making it super hurtful.
Yeah. Now, but you can't be like, this guy planned to kill that person and is a murderer if you don't know that they did that, if they haven't been convicted yet. You have to say they allegedly planned to kill that person, is allegedly a murderer. That's just a matter of, societally, I think we should do that. It's not just like, I don't think that's just protecting yourself. I think, again, ethically.
Sure.
It's a good thing to do, is to respect the fact that you're innocent until proven guilty. People before us came up with that idea. I kind of like that idea. Because if I was in that chair, I wouldn't want somebody talking about that before it'd been, all the facts have been laid out. And again, I'm a presentist. This is more of my own personal philosophical beliefs. If I didn't experience the event, it's as equal to me as any event that could exist or not exist. I know it's a very naive way to live, but I have no proof of what happened in someone else's world. When you see videos of people getting shot, that's a little bit more proof. But if it's just hearsay evidence, I don't make any decisions. I think that's a much more rational way to live my life.
Yeah. Well, and I try to, deal with things that I read about and hear about on the news. Obviously, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I didn't experience it, but it is being presented to me in a certain way, and I do have an opinion about it, of how it affects the world at large. There's some of these things, individual cases, that, if had I been speaking about those under the auspice of it affects everyone, like it does, some of these precedent-setting cases have affected the world at large, or at least American.
Recent cases?
Well, regardless, some of these cases have affected how freedom of speech is interpreted in America. And at the time, to say, well, it doesn't affect me, I think there's a certain point at which that point of view is maybe not the best founded either.
Well, the world around us is always changing, right? That's
True.
what you mean. I agree. You always have to examine the world around you. It is more difficult to examine the world around us now that there's so much more information available to us.
Well, there's a
from
lot more
everywhere.
real time.
Yeah, real time, but from everywhere and from things that aren't necessarily in my community. That's what bothers me the most, is when things that aren't part of and that might be not thinking globally, but I'm usually more concerned with injustice happening in front of me than injustice happening across the country from me.
Okay.
Well, maybe that's how World War II happened, right?
Well, I mean, arguments abound, but I mean, yeah, sure. We did have on the show one time the one, and his name escapes me at the moment, but he was the German minister that didn't speak up when certain groups of people were being rounded up by the Gestapo, and then he came to the realization that when they finally came for him, there was no one left to speak.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, yeah, weight of the world on your shoulders, sure, there's that aspect of it, but I think there's, parts of it too that spreading the word around about some of these things is also important to do for the sake of like, hey, people wake up and realize that these freedoms are under attack all the time.
That's right, and that is why shows like this are important to have. Yeah, the question is just whether what you're saying is true or not, and whether that's what always concerns me, is whether any of it's true. Like the FEMA camp thing. Come on, I don't believe that.
There's a lot of them.
What are they? What are the FEMA camps?
FEMA camps, man.
What's a FEMA camp?
I don't know.
I went to see Ron Paul speak years ago, and he told me Obama's going to put all of you in AmeriCorps. Obama's almost done. I'm not in AmeriCorps.
Well, yeah, and we haven't all gotten RFID chipped yet. But,
Yeah.
But these are things that keep coming up as concern, and that maybe the fact that we keep bringing them up and there's some kind of stirmate about it, maybe prevents it from happening.
Maybe. Again, that's
Maybe gets people to sign petitions
that's the same thing as like the
Right on-
gentleman's
right on
bet,
signs.
right? The gentleman's bet about God. It's about the same thing.
How does that one go?
Like you're better off believing in God than not believing in God, because the chances are that if there is a heaven, even if it's a small chance, you go to heaven, and if you don't and there is a heaven, you go to hell. Like you're better off living as if there's something that could be a problem. I don't
Right.
think that's a valid argument. I just don't agree with it.
I don't know, man. What if?
What if? I don't care. There's no reason to care.
Alrighty, man. What? Anything else that you wanted to share with us about the?
We should
freedom
do a
of speech?
test about how in the future of the truth noir, if you have like a dude that you really like, let's say there's a bank, and you think they killed some people and sold guns to some people, how would we present that in the future?
Find sources,
Or
say that it is alleged.
even I believe, I think you can do. But you can't say they did this.
Okay.
And so that's the big one, is you can't.
So, but then would saying I believe that they did this open up a liability for slander or defamation?
We can look into it, but I don't think it does, because you're caveating it. I think caveats help. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I think it does. It takes away a lot more of that direct like slandering, because you're a member of the press now. You have a show. You want people to watch your show. Your face is on it. You're broadcasting, so you can't directly slander or libel someone. You wouldn't want somebody doing that about your show.
True.
Somebody makes the Fuck Norm show, and like put a jihadi thing on you. You wouldn't want that, right?
No, that's true.
So that's where the legal precedent comes from. Maybe we should do that show. Maybe you should slander yourself for a whole episode.
I'll put on the Santa Claus wig and do the Truth Noir debunked.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, okay, well, I investigated Truth Noir, and unfortunately, I found that it's 100% correct. Sorry, guys. So it's about our time. I thought it was important to do this because everyone out there has an opinion. Everyone out there, at least I hope, is interested in the truth and the expression of it. And so I wanted to clear a couple things up on what the correct way to do that is, versus sharing opinions and, various things of the like. So I want to thank Nolan Silverstein for coming on and talking to me about this stuff. And happy ho-hos, everyone. Enjoy your gift of the freedom of speech. And wherever you're going, get there safe. Good night.
Eat a dick. I can say that.
Freedom of speech.
Yeah.
Night, everyone.